woke up from the operation, and I got these big boobs and the vagina and the whole thing, tubes hanging out here and there, and it's like, wow, what have I done?
In the beginning, God made human beings in His image, male and female He created them. He commanded them to multiply through sexual union in a lifelong covenantal relationship with a member of the opposite sex. When they sinned, however, the entire creation fell, all of it, both man and nature. Man's heart was darkened, and he began to worship the creature rather than the Creator. Hatred, war, and sexual immorality ensued. The very DNA of man became corrupt. Sickness and disease spread across the earth. Lifespans shortened. Babies died in childbirth, and others were born with defects. The vast majority of mankind lost all knowledge of the Creator, so they invented mythical gods who reflected their own corruption. To explain the birth of those born with sexual malformities, gods were invented who shared similar defects. According to Roman historian Plutarch, Cybele was one of the earliest intersex deities, an ancient Phrygian god referred to as Mother of the Gods, who was worshipped with orgiastic rites in the mountains of Anatolia, and later Greece and Rome. Depictions of her can be found in artifacts dating back to the earliest civilizations in Mesopotamia, Assyria, and Babylonia. According to the myth, Cybele was born with both male and female sex organs and characteristics, and hermaphrodite according to Greek mythology. The Roman poet Ovid later wrote that hermaphroditus, from whom the term is derived, was fashioned by the gods when they merged the son of Aphrodite and Hermes with the water nymph Salmachus. Ever since, according to myth, hermaphrodites have long been a symbol of androgyny or effeminacy and have been portrayed in Greco-Roman art as female figures with male genitals. In the myth, Cybele's beautiful young friend Attis castrates himself in order to found a priesthood for her called the Galli. Various ancient Roman sources refer to the Galli as a middle or third gender. After Christianity was made the official religion of the Roman Empire in the 4th century AD, St. Augustine wrote of seeing Galli parading through the squares and streets of Carthage with oiled hair and powdered faces, languid limbs, and feminine gait. Jewish rabbinic literature refers to two classes of intersex people. The Tumtum are persons whose sex is unknown because their genitalia are hidden. There is a state of doubt about whether they are male or female. The androgynos, on the other hand, are individuals who possess both male and female genitalia and/or characteristics. These were not to be confused with eunuchs, who were castrated pagan priests or temple prostitutes. Historically, intersex individuals have been considered the sex that seems to prevail in their behavior. Today, we define intersex persons as those whose sex characteristics, including chromosomes, gonads, sex hormones, or genitals, are abnormal. The most common intersex condition is Klinefelter syndrome, where the sex chromosomes display in variant ways such as XXY instead of the normal XX or XY. This results in one or more abnormalities during sexual development, such as infertility. Despite claims by trans activists to the contrary, most of the ancient references to behaviors that appear to cross normal sexual identity boundaries are for what we now call intersex individuals.
Intersex is a special term that is used to refer to people who have some kind of physiological disorder where their body does not correspond to what we would normally expect a biological male or a female to have.
I have a condition called Klinefelter syndrome. It's a genetic condition. It's not hereditary.
The intersex is a different category. It's a very, very small population, less than 1%. And these are individuals who are born with a mixture of Y, X and Y chromosomes, and sometimes the genitalia is not clearly male or female. This is a different medical problem altogether. This is not a psychological problem.
There's very few people in the population that have it that are affected adversely. The term intersex is a term that applies to Klinefelter syndrome. I know that because I have a penis and a scrotum, that I'm a male. I've never thought I was a female. I've never identified. There was a period of time when I was growing up that I put on mom's makeup and I tried on women's clothes. But that wasn't because I thought I didn't think I was a boy. I mean, maybe back then that was it, but I just identified more with mother. But nowadays, it's like, no, I know I'm a man. I just struggle with how I fit in with other men, is part of what the deal is. So intersex, I'm growing more accustomed to it. But being intersex does not make me not male.
Now, the important thing to recognize about intersex individuals is that they are a different category than what we would call transgender individuals. Transgender individuals are those who have a normal male or female body. Biologically speaking, they have a normal male or female body, but they are experiencing a psychological incongruity between the way they feel and their actual body. That is very different than an intersex person who actually has a biological ambiguity in their body.
Intersex is a condition altogether different from being transgendered. What separates them is biology. Let's turn our attention to those who can truly be defined as transgendered. Technically, transgender is a non-medical umbrella term describing individuals whose gender identity or expression is at odds with the genetic sex with which they were born. This is now referred to as gender dysphoria. In modern parlance, however, transgendered individuals include transsexuals, transvestites, drag queens, and, incorrectly, intersex individuals. The term is independent of sexual orientation. Transsexual is a medical term that refers to individuals who have undergone some form of medical or surgical treatment for sex reassignment. But in modern use, the term also includes those who want treatment but are unable to get it for one reason or another. Transvestism or cross-dressing is a term that defines people who derive erotic pleasure from dressing as the opposite sex. But in modern parlance, it includes those who do so whether it causes erotic pleasure or not. Not included are those who dress as the opposite sex for political reasons, such as Joan of Arc, or for reasons related to their job, such as Queen Hatshepsut, who donned male clothing and a false beard in order to rule Egypt in 1503 BC. Drag queens or kings are people who dress as the opposite sex for the purpose of entertainment. Some are true transvestites, but others, such as Milton Berle, Jack Lemmon, Tony Curtis, Flip Wilson, Tim Curry, and others, do so simply for laughs. Some drag queens are driven by a desire to mock the opposite sex by exaggerating their sexuality, but others do it simply for the acceptance that it brings them.
So when you study this population, you see that these are people with very fragile identity, very fragile, again, ego. We use the word ego, the sense of me.
The term gender identity refers to a person's experience or expression of their maleness or femaleness. To put it in very simple terms, how do they feel? Do they experience themselves? Do they perceive themselves as male or female? That term has been introduced because of the phenomenon of people finding that there's an incongruity between their inner experience of being male or female and their outward biology, their biological sex.
So far, they have not found like a biological or a genetic foundation or any prenatal factors that determine this kind of condition.
The technical term for it is gender dysphoria. It's recognized by people really on all sides of the debate over transgenderism. Where the differences lie is in understanding what would cause that kind of condition and also how it should be treated, and indeed if it should be treated. But usually for those who recognize that this does cause distress for the person involved, there's a question of, well, how is this distress to be resolved?
I have learned through the years of doing ministry work that many individuals who struggle with transgenderism actually struggle obviously with their identity, with their true identity. Many times this is caused by their false perception of who they are, rejection, whether that rejection has been caused by somebody else, perhaps a parent, a father, when it comes to a male that struggles with this, or their own perception of that relationship with their father.
When it all started for me, I was about 4 years old, And my grandmother was, for whatever reason, enjoyed cross-dressing me. And by the time I was 5, she had made me a purple chiffon full-length dress. And she just would get excited about me being a little girl. She liked me better as a little girl. She really reinforced that female appearance of mine. And I became so accustomed to cross-dressing and being appreciated and fawned over because she kept telling me how good I looked. I never got that when I was a boy from her. It was only when I was a girl. So, you know, I'm sure that I enjoyed getting the affirmation. And so after 2 years, I decided to take the dress home, knowing that when I had the opportunity and the house was clear, then I could put that dress on and maybe get those same feelings back that Grandma would make me feel.
I viewed my dad, you know, he emotionally was abusive to my mom as well as verbally. I watched my mom crumble underneath that. My little mind came to the conclusions that women are hated, women are vulnerable, and women are weak. And that's why he was picking on my mom, basically. And then when I watched my mom respond out of these things, I saw that she was weak because she didn't know how to stand up for herself. She didn't know how to draw those boundaries because she was afraid of him. She acted like she was hated. And so when I looked at all of that, I'm like, okay, so I'm like my mom, and my dad's this way, and my mom's that way, and I don't want to be hated. You know, I don't want to be weak. I don't want to be vulnerable. So what else do I have but to become a man? When I was 7, my little brother was born, and he was celebrated tremendously, you know, and whatever affection I had from my dad was now all turned to my little brother. So there was another lie that crept in there that I could be replaced. Boys are celebrated, women are replaced. And so that really affirmed, in order to get that affection, I had to be a boy.
I realized that I was different at the age of 5 because I didn't like the typical things that little boys liked. The kids in the neighborhood, they beat me up and I couldn't play with them. The little girls, they always was attracted to me, and they were always drawn to me. And when these little guys would beat me up and stuff, they would say, don't beat him up, don't do that. And then I found myself hanging more with the girls, and from that point on in my life, I figured that girls were better than boys at that time. And this is maybe what I was supposed to be, because the girls liked me, but the boys were so mean.
Well, I was raised in a Christian home since I was 10 years old. You know, my home life was something different. My father was an alcoholic. He abused my mother fiercely. He was a binge drinker. We actually left him when I was 7 years old. Him, my mom, and my sister. And she basically raised us here in Los Angeles on her own. In school, it was a very unhappy place for me because I was a very feminine kid. Being that I didn't have a male role model, I was very feminine. Hung up with the girls, didn't play with the boys. You know, as things are on, I was branded a homosexual before I knew what it was. I had to go ask the kids in the school really pretty much what meaning gay meant.
Me and my sister would take baths together and everything else, and my mom, she would wash us down because everything had to be like clean. And I remember telling my older sister one day that I was gonna be like her. I don't know where that came from, and she just kind of looked at me like, okay, but it just, I don't know why, just something in me. I wanted to be that way.
My father wasn't present because he was a very violent man. He was very abusive to my mother, and so she decided to leave him. And my mother battles with major depression, and so she fought very hard to stay present to my brother and I. And she was the one who sort of introduced my brother and I to my father. And we really saw my father primarily through my mother's eyes and through the eyes of my grandmother. And they didn't really like him because he was so abusive and so diabolical, in the sense that he didn't own his responsibility as my father. He didn't own that he was supposed to help me in my development as a young man. And so that was an emotional injury to me like you wouldn't believe.
I didn't act like a typical guy or a male kid. I acted more like the female kid. So I started associating myself with the female persuasion. So I started stealing my mom's clothes and wearing them in the closet behind their backs. And every now and then I got caught and I would get punished for it, but I kept going. And it just got worse and worse. And it was like one piece of clothing, two pieces of clothing. Next thing you know, I was full out drag, cross-dress, trying to look like a woman, not know much about makeup, because I'm just a kid, I don't know that stuff.
I remember hearing people say what my mother often said is that when I was born, I was like one ugly baby. So I grew up always feeling that something was wrong with me. My father, I know, always desired having a son. When he did have a son, the son was nothing like he expected. But before having that son, guess who came along? It was me. So I was born the child that they were least wanting as far as having a girl.
My father owned his own business, so I really never had that close fellowship with my dad. He was just always busy, so I really never had that one-on-one intimate relationship between a father and a son. And my mom worked all the time as well, but she was more there for us.
I remembered my mom telling me at 2 years old that I was supposed to be a girl. She had already had 2 boys and she wanted a girl. When I was in my 50s, I asked her if she really said that, because that stuck with me all my life. And she said she had, because I thought it was something, maybe I made that up, you know. And she actually had said that. But she said, don't you remember I also told you that I was glad you were a boy? I said, no, I don't remember that part.
My father was never there. I went to my grandparents' home, which they were Christian, and it was a safe place. And he would come and he never acknowledged me or my other brother. He never contributed financially. So I never got the father's love or acceptance.
Always kind of felt I was different, a little different, because I didn't know exactly why. I didn't know how to express that, or even, I just knew something was different.
I remember thinking, I'm different. I'm more male-oriented, so I must be a male. The TV tells me I'm a male. My mom says I'm not quite Japanese girl, and so I must be a male. And so I started actually thinking of myself as a male since then.
I don't have any memories of being happy being a girl. It's just I always knew I was in the wrong body, that I was a little boy trapped in a girl's body. And it wasn't a passing phase. I think my parents thought I was just a tomboy and I would grow out of it like a lot of little girls do. But for me, it was an obsession. I just knew I was not complete unless I had male genitalia. And so when I was 9 years old, I heard about these things called sex change operations that we call sex reassignment surgery now. And I thought that's the answer to my dilemma. So I decided as soon as I'm old enough and I have enough money, I'm going to change my name to David, get a sex change, and live happily ever after.
I took the dress home so I could at least feel the feelings myself that I would get when I put them on. Even though I didn't have Grandma speaking to me, I could hear her voice, I think, speaking to me. So it was very powerful. We were having dinner one night, and Mom says, so what's with the dress that you have in the drawer? And boy, I started breaking out in a sweat. And I said, well, Grandma made it for me. And so then this big explanation about what had happened. And then my dad, you could almost see him begin to glow like a Roman candle, because he was a part-time police officer, an industrial goods salesman, not exactly a wimpy guy. He was a judo expert and all that stuff. So he was, to say the least, not too excited about what he just heard. From that point on, I wasn't allowed to go to Grandma's. And Grandma felt she was very angry with me because I outed the lie, right? Or not the lie, but I outed what was supposed to be a secret. And then I felt responsible for everything going wrong between my parents, my grandmother, and me. So now you see the dynamic. This is where I felt things were not going right.
When I was 11, I have an older half-brother, and he began to molest me. And even though I felt that it was wrong, You know, I had that lie in there, women are weak and women are vulnerable. I grew up in this really unhealthy atmosphere. You know, all those things that, yeah, it would be better to be a boy. People are recognizing that I'm already cute as a boy, so I might as well be that. And being a woman isn't really a great option.
My dad's adopted brother, who was only a teenager, one time at a family thing, decided that I was fair game, and he began to take me off behind the garage, and he began to molest me. So now I've got Grandma, the purple dress, and I've got Uncle who decided he would molest me.
I met my father at 10 years old, and my father had been incarcerated. And when he got home, the only thing I wanted was a relationship with my dad, and I knew that things was going to change because my dad was home and he could protect me from all of this and all these people, and that's not what happened. I would go to these places where my dad lived, and it was always with another woman. It was always with some strange woman I've never met before, and he would wait till she go to sleep at night, and he would come in my room and he would have full-on sex with me. And he would say things to me that made me feel like I was a woman.
As we grew up and girls started developing, I started wearing makeup too. I soon found out that I got a lot of attention doing that. You know, being that guys wouldn't hang out with me, I soon found out too if I smoked pot and drank too, that's when they wouldn't want to hang out with me. So I got into that when I was 13 years old. By the time I graduated high school, when I was 16 years old, I was actually had long hair. I was in full makeup. I really thought that God had made this horrible mistake that I should have been born a woman. So I was going about my way of correcting that.
He decided to talk to me about it. Do you feel strange about what happened last night? And I said, yes, sir, I do. And he said, well, you shouldn't, because that's the way a father loves a son. That is something that you haven't experienced because I've been away from you for so long. And this is the way that it should be. And it's okay. It's going to be weird at first, but I guarantee you, it'll become normal. And it did. It became normal.
There was a lot of abuse. Like I said, my mother was mentally ill. I went to Catholic schools, and at that time was being sexually molested by an older cousin. I'd been gang raped in the Boy Scouts. So I saw that something with the femininity, they were making fun of me and stuff, but once again, I thought if I act that way, then I could get what I needed, which was affirmation and stuff, so I gave myself into that.
I always thought that if I shared about being sexually abused, that I would be blamed, that I would be in trouble. When the abuse happened, it just happened. The boundary lines were crossed and nothing was said. And as I grew older, identifying more with the feminine, having only girlfriends and not male friends, I began to develop as though I were a girl, and I began to see boys as though they were the opposite gender, different than me.
By the time I got to the point where I was fully dressing, I was probably about 10, 11 years old, and my older brother, he caught me fully dressed, and I got in trouble the next morning. But it got worse at 10. Because that's when my uncle introduced pornography while we were playing video games in his room. So it became a little more sexual than just cross-dressing. It became a sexual gratification by dressing up as a woman.
When I was going to Shaw Junior High School, and two of my classmates even, they were like, hey, we walking to school together. Oh, I forgot my book. Come go in my house with me. The next thing I know, they had literally pretty much tied me up, taken my clothes off, and attempted to rape me. This is like around 13.
When I was 9, my father had his own business, and one of his employees had stayed the night. And during that evening, I had slept in the living room. Well, to my surprise, I woke up with a naked man over me and just proceeded to, say to me, if I say anything, I would be hurt.
When I was 9 years old, a neighborhood kid came over to spend the night with my middle brother, and we shared a room together. And he showed my brothers things that a child should not be subject to. You know, he obviously learned them from an adult. So that made an impact on me because I became a participant in that as well. At that point, I began cross-dressing.
I would question myself all the time because I found myself being attracted to boys. And I would try to suppress that and try to get into a relationship, you know, with a young girl in my teens. But at the same time, I was having same-sex attractions. And I think a lot of that stemmed from that molestation because it happened repetitively, not just that one time.
I was molested on my mom's boyfriend from probably the age of 5 to 12. When you're scared to tell because he said he would kill you or take you to Mexico, then you're not communicating with your mom.
My first experience was I happened to be in the bathroom, and that's where my mom kept a dirty clothes hamper, and she had laid her clothes on top of the hamper, and I don't even know why, but I decided to try them on, and when I did, I just felt right. I don't know how to explain it really. It just, as I looked at myself, I just knew this was right.
When I was 10 years old, I was exposed to pornography through some childhood friends, and that awakened all sorts of sexual things in me. And I found myself drawn to the male in those images, and I wanted to be the man that bonded sexually with a woman. And that was the beginning of sexual addictions that would plague my life for the next 20 plus years.
There was an incident when I was about 12. I had been cross-dressing in the bathroom. And my mom, before she passed away, came to the door, and the door was locked, and she wanted in. And of course, I was in her clothes. So I was scrambling to get out of her clothes. So when I opened the door, there I was naked and with lipstick all over my face. And I remember my mom doing the worst thing I could possibly imagine, and that was she called my dad in. And when my dad came and saw me there, I know this is what he thought. He thought that he could get me to not ever do that again by shaming me. And he shamed me pretty good. But what he didn't realize is that wrapped everything in a thick blanket of shame. And it was just like pouring gasoline on a fire.
When I was 10 years old, I was raped. And what that did to me was gave me no sense of boundaries. And even at the age of 10, I realized that a lot of things happened to me because I'm a girl. If I was a boy, I'd be more accepted, and that's the message that I kept getting.
I was collecting for the newspaper back when I was 13 at this guy's house, and he says, would you like a beer? I'm 13 years old, of course I want a beer. So I had a couple of beers, and then he says, would you want to see some girly movies, you know? And I said, yeah, you know, and I lit up, and I was like, oh, sure, you know? And so I'm laying in the bed and watching the movies, and he's laying beside me, and then he's starting to, you know, put his hand on me, and you know, and the whole thing got started. The session went on, and I got up and left. This went on for, about maybe 6-7 weeks, maybe a couple months. And one time after that, he says, well, now it's your turn to take care of me. And I said, I don't think so. And I took off like a jackrabbit, and I never went back.
Some individuals have been molested. Some individuals as well have found that because of an experience that they've had in life, a certain trauma, that they seek out a different identity to actually leave their true identity behind more times than not. And sometimes they've actually seen their parents become hurt by other individuals and by the pain and how they take that in that has wanted them to escape through an imagination of a sort. Other times, there's obviously other mental underlying issues. You've got obsessive compulsive, personality disorder, separation anxiety. There's just so many reasons for this, but the point is the underlying issues exist. And if we aren't able as ministries, as ministers and churches to understand what the person is really dealing with and hurt, and all we're allowing with sex reassignment surgery and cosmetic surgery is for them to take on a different identity on the outside, but everything's still inside. They're still hurting, and it's not going to fix the wounds of the heart and the soul.
It was in the early 20th century that a handful of doctors began performing crude sex reassignment surgeries, the most famous of which was on Danish painter Einar Wegener, who suffered through multiple surgeries in the 1930s in an attempt to become a woman and conceive a child. His story was retold in the 2015 film The Danish Girl, starring Eddie Redmayne. Wegener died as a result of his fifth surgery. In the 1940s, Dorothy Tipton lived as a male American jazz musician named Billy Tipton. Her own son did not know her secret until she died. In the 1950s, after his discharge from the Army, George Jorgensen underwent sex reassignment surgery and began calling himself Christine Jorgensen. A now classic headline declared, "Ex-GI becomes blonde bombshell." In 1965, psychologist John Money persuaded Johns Hopkins Hospital to begin performing sex reassignment surgeries. But after a 1979 study found that those who had had such surgeries were not more adjusted to society than their peers, the psychiatrist-in-chief at Hopkins Hospital, Dr. Paul McHugh, shut the program down. Head researcher John Meyer declared, "Surgery is not proper treatment for a psychiatric disorder. These patients have severe psychological problems that don't go away following surgery," a finding reinforced in a major 2011 study out of Sweden. According to Dr. McHugh, sex change is biologically impossible. Transgenderism is a mental disorder that merits treatment. People who undergo sex reassignment surgery do not change from men to women or vice versa. Rather, they become feminized men or masculinized women. Transgender feelings do not correspond with physical reality in a way similar to an anorexic who looks in the mirror and thinks that they are overweight. 70 to 80% of children who express transgender feelings will, over time, spontaneously lose those feelings. People who promote sexual reassignment surgery are collaborating with and promoting a mental disorder. Dr. McHugh also admonished those he called misguided doctors who administer puberty-delaying hormones to very young children, even though the drugs stunt the children's growth and risk causing sterility. Such actions, says McHugh, come close to child abuse.
Every so often, the DSM, you know what the DSM is, Diagnostic Statistical Manual. And this determines what is considered by the mental health profession as to what is pathological and not pathological. Every so often, they revise it. And every time they revise it, we psychologists, to renew our license, we have to sit there all day and listen to the revised version of it. But you get there, and the presenter says, this version is a better version than all the other previous DSMs because it's more scientific. We have scientific evidence. That's how he opens it, okay? We're sitting there for like 6 hours listening to all the diagnosis, and they flash us a picture of Chastity Bono smiling, and they said the original committee decided that transgenderism is a pathology. It's a distortion. But the committee got so many angry letters, so many angry protested letters, more than any other diagnosis, that the committee changed its mind and they normalized it. You could see it's not a scientific organization. Psychology, psychiatry is no longer a scientific organization. It's losing its credibility. So the DSMs are becoming opinion pieces.
This person had called and he had been visiting a therapist for just a year. Within 3 months of visiting the therapist, she had talked him into having his name changed legally. Within 8 months, he was receiving pressure from the therapist to have the sex reassignment surgery, or she was not going to see him any longer. What he also discovered during this visit is that she herself was a transgender person. So we have transgender therapists that are already going into the appointments with an agenda. And it is almost like, how fast can we get this person to take on this other identity, have their name changed, have sex reassignment surgery, and live in this identity?
I actually began to have all these thoughts about who am I? You know, am I really a girl? Am I a boy? During this time, I thought, well, this is something that must be so new to God, he didn't even understand it. With that, felt like I was on my own, that I needed to fix this myself. I was still going to church, and I met a girl one night. We began to date, and within 2 years, we got married.
When I was 16, I got a car, and I had met a girl. She became my girlfriend, and I would go out and pick her up, and we'd go out on dates, and I was totally lying to my parents where I was going. Eventually, that caught up with me because her parents started putting things together, and they didn't seem right. And she called my parents, and then my parents confronted me. That was when I told them I wanted to be a man, and my dad pretty much told me, we will not talk about this again. You are not going to do that. And I said to my mom, Mom, you know what? I really do want to be a boy. And my mom said, that's gross.
If you looked at one side of my life, it would look absolutely perfect. White picket fence, 2 cars in the garage, everything's good. I'm making good money. The kids are healthy. Everything's good. I didn't drink around the house. I wasn't a slosh drunk at home. I did all that stuff when I was away, and I'd get that relief out of the way and then come home and be a different person. So I had this total 2 worlds that I lived in, actually 3 when you think about it, because I had the family life, I had the purple dress life, and then I had a great career that I was developing and becoming very successful at.
Even though the girl knew about me, she still viewed me as her boyfriend. So we kind of went off and on there for a little while. And then when I became 19, I got out of the house. I started doing my research to find out who would help me. I went to a doctor, and he's like, yeah, I can start you on hormones. So I moved out of the house, and I began the hormones, and I thought I was free. I was like, yeah, I'm finally here. I have arrived. I am free. This is my life.
I went to this club. I was about 17 years old. I was talking to people, and they told me about the show, and they said that every person that's in this show is a man. And I was intrigued by that. I wanted to see that. And there was this transgender woman on stage with the body of a woman. And she had this red dress on with all these rhinestones and sparkles, and she was poured basically into the dress. And I was confused because someone told me that everyone that's going to perform here is a man. But clearly my eyes was telling me that that was a woman, and I could not believe what I saw. And then right there at that moment, I knew that's what I was.
After I graduated from high school, I moved out here to Los Angeles to go to art school and was taken to my first gay bar when I was 16 years old. You know, they liked me. I was young. I was easily taken advantage of. Drugs, alcohol came into the picture. I was drunk every night. I dropped out of school and basically, you know, ended up homeless.
The thing about males that attracted me is because I always felt like the other, and I thought that then if you're the other, then you should actually be attracted to men, and thinking in my mind that one day I will be this, and then I could get not only the protection, but the completeness of what a man does for a woman.
I went directly to the dressing room to see this lady up close and in person and ask her, was she a lady? At that time, I asked her that question. She had her head down, and they were putting a wig on. She had no clothes on. She threw her head up and she looked at me and she opened her legs and she said, this is all woman. Male genitalia was there. I backed up and I ran out of the dressing room. I was shaking. I couldn't believe that this was true. And I knew that it was possible.
I used to go to these X-rated bookstores all the time, and I saw this one magazine, and it kind of caught my eye, and it said Transformation, you know? So I grabbed the magazine, and I'm tired of all the other stuff, girl on girl, guy on girl, guys, bisexual, all this different stuff. I needed something, you know, new to fuel the fire. So anyway, I saw this magazine, Transformation, and so I picked it up, and I'm looking at it, and it's like a she-male, you know? It's like the top half, they have the boobs and the penis on the bottom, and you know, and I thought, oh, this is cool, this is different, you know? And so I grabbed it, paid for it, and took it home. got excited with it and took care of myself. And then I couldn't stop, you see. And then it had to be movies and videos and everything with the she-male stuff because it was exciting, you know. And I saw this ad in one of in the magazine, you know, and it said transformation, you come down and get a makeover, you know, $75. A glamour boutique here in Vegas. And so I called them up. I said, I need an appointment to get a makeover. And said, yeah, come on down, such and such time and everything. And I went. They made me look good. They called me Joey, like Joey Heatherton. And I mean, I was gorgeous, you know, all the makeup, the wig, the clothes. I was like, I'm sold.
I'm walking down the streets of Kingston, Georgia, trying to get enough courage, enough strength to just end it right there and then. And then I met a guy there in the homeless shelter who was a cross-dresser. And eventually we got to know each other pretty well. We got an apartment together. And the whole time while I'm homeless, I'm screaming at God saying, why are you letting this happen to me? Why me? What did I do wrong to you?
I'm watching this television thing, and when it went off, just like that, a voice said to me, you were supposed to have been born a boy. I didn't know gay people, didn't want to be a gay person. But when I realized I was born in the wrong body, and that's why I didn't really like boys, that's why I was the tomboy, I was my father's little Ed, it resonated.
She said, we have these get-togethers ever so often, you know, where we go out. It's called Girls' Night Out, where a bunch of girls, you know, guys get dressed up like girls, and they go out on the town, mainly to gay bars. There's a couple of them getting the operation and transitioning, and within about a year, I was like sold, you know. I couldn't stop. I said, I want to get it too.
By the time I was 39 years old and I started hearing about transgenders, I would have been struggling for about 36 years from the time my grandmother first cross-dressed me. That's a long time to keep a secret, to struggle, and to try to deal with it on your own without any psychiatric or psychological help. So I went to a specialist, the #1 guy in the world because I had the money to do it, and it was a guy who wrote the original international Harry Benjamin standards of care. He was the guy, he was the guru, knew how to diagnose the disorder, he knew what appropriate treatments to take, and he knew who should be doing the surgery if there was to be surgery and the hormone therapy. He knew it. He was the guy. So I went into him and sat with him. In 45 minutes, he looked at me and he says, you've got gender dysphoria. And what you need to do is undergo gender reassignment surgery, take hormones, and just completely change and become a female. And I was kind of dumbfounded.
The fact is that the research that's being done, the research that's being conducted on transgender people, both in terms of the surgery itself and the long-term effects, it's usually being done by people who have a political interest in this, okay? Just like in the issue of homosexuality. Most of the people that control the funding for the research are pro-gay. The American Psychological Association took the position of normalizing homosexuality, and any publication that is put out by the APA or any journal that is influenced by the APA is going to be pro-gay research. It's going to justify its position. So most people are having to read the distortions that are being put out by these political activist organizations that pose as objective scientists.
I went to a club that same night, and I actually went into my closet to find what could I put on to make myself look masculine. I remember finding a hat and maybe a shirt that I unbuttoned down to my chest a little bit. I mean, I tried to butch myself up and look more like a man. And when I walked in that bar, it was like my first step in that bar was if I had been going in that bar forever. I walked in like I owned the place. No one in that bar would have ever known that I was totally straight, perhaps. I mean, I wasn't gay or transgender, but it was like my new identity. So I walked into that bar, and for 18 years, from the time I walked in there, I transitioned my life to being a male.
One thing led to another, and I got the name change, and then I had to go go and talk to a psychotherapist and get 3 letters, 2 letters, one from the psychotherapist, which had like $450, and then another one was $250 from a psychiatrist. And then I went to Scottsdale with these letters and talked to the surgeon. He says, "Oh yeah, you're good to go." You know, this was in August, and I wanted to get the surgery as soon as I could, but I figured, well, I'm not going to get it for a while. And he said, "Well, I can do the surgery in November." You know, and it was only 3 months away. And I was like, okay, you know, I had the money, everything was lined up, bing, bang, boom. And here I go, you know. I woke up from the operation, and I got these big boobs and the vagina and the whole thing, tubes hanging out here and there, and it's like, wow, what have I done?
Absolutely, there's no evidence for brain difference. This is a lie that is being promoted by an incredible industry that's making a lot of money on these poor people, okay? Oh, your brain is different. Where in the brain, you show me, where in the brain is this boy believing he's a girl?
The second week I went back and I told him about my childhood. I gave him some of the information about what had happened in my childhood more in depth, about the abuse by the uncle, and he says, "Oh, and by the way," he says, "I have your letter of approval here. You can take to the doctor and have your surgery, 2 sessions." And I said, "Well, that seems a bit quick to make that kind of assessment." So while he was prepared for me, he said, "No, you're a candidate, perfect candidate for this. I've been doing this for years. I know what I'm talking about." And I said, "Okay, that's fine. Keep the letter. Let me think on it." And I waited 2 years. And during that 2 years, the pressure cooker, maybe from hearing it, maybe from grandma, maybe from the radio playing in my head, maybe from the sexual abuse, I can't begin to tell you what it all was, but there was a big mix master going on with thrown in with a little alcohol that by the time I was 42 years old, I had sat down with my wife and said, "Here's what's been happening. We need to divorce and I need to change genders."
I had met some transsexual friends. I actually thought they were women at first, but I was told they were really men. And I don't know why, I just took a liking to them, started hanging around them. I was 18 years old. They hung out in a nightclub that I would frequent. I actually became best friends with one of them. Talked to me about hormones and stuff like that, because I said, you know, I would dress up like a woman and go out for Halloween just to have fun. Well, I found myself liking it and wanting to be like them.
I remember going to the bar when I was 15 years old, and I remember watching these drag queens perform. And I remember thinking to myself, they are being celebrated. They are being loved and liked. And so I remember thinking to myself, one day I'm gonna be accepted. I'm gonna be loved for being a female impersonator. And so I remember pursuing it when I was 17 years old. And by the time I was 18, I began competing in professional pageantry. And by the age of 19, I was competing at the Miss Gay Texas pageant. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, I have invested so much time and energy, and I'm actually amounting to something.
I was in a pattern of confession, remorse, you know, doing little things like trying on some pantyhose and stuff like that. When I got back into church, I started writing Christian songs, started singing them in church, and this young lady took a liking to me. I asked her to marry me, and we got married. I did not tell her, my new wife, about the cross-dressing. I told her about the alcohol. I told her about, you know, the troubled childhood, but I didn't tell her about that.
At 15, I thought I was I came to my mom and told her that I was gay. But then probably by 20, I knew there was something more, that I wanted to be a woman. Probably about at the age of 24, 25, was introduced to a gay bar. And it was on Halloween of all days, and I won Best Drag. And I met a transgendered woman, and we became best friends, so I started getting into the shows. And then I met my partner at a drag show, and we were together for nearly 17 years. So through that time, I started all my hormonal therapy, counseling, and about 8 years ago, I had my papers signed to have my sex change. But instead, we decided to put a down payment on a house, so I just put that on the back burner.
It wasn't long after we were married that I actually started cross-dressing in front of my wife. Matter of fact, I had her buying my clothes, my makeup, those things. She was just trying to understand it, okay? Then there came a place where we can't do this anymore. So I went to that same pastor I lived with for a while, and we tried to pray it through. And we had several prayer sessions, but it wasn't affecting me. So then he decided to send me to a psychologist. So he actually made the appointment for me. I went and saw the psychologist. We had our first session, and he said, I want to talk to you again. So I went in the second session, and he says, well, what you have is gender identity disorder. And then he wanted to know how I wanted to treat it, which confused me. Because always before you go into a doctor, they find out what's wrong with you and they say, this is the course of treatment to get over this. He didn't do that. As a matter of fact, he said, what we need to do is start bringing your wife into these sessions so that we can counsel towards divorce. And then what we're going to do is I've got another doctor we'll send you to, and we'll start you on hormone therapy and all these things. We'll have our sessions and work through this. You'll start dressing in female attire all the time. And in 12 or 18 months, we'll get you some letters for sexual reassignment surgery, because then you can be the woman you already are.
I eventually met the host of the show. She saw me and she thought that I was the cutest little boy, and she said, well, let me dress you up in drag and see what happens. So she dressed me up, and the transformation was unbelievable. It was unbelievable to me, and it was unbelievable to her, and it was almost as if I was taken over. There was some sort of entity in me. I was someone else when I dressed up, and I got the opportunity to perform for the very, very first time. And when I hit that stage, I had a mask on. I was a different person, and I was embodying that transgender woman that I saw that first time.
I went ahead and had the gender reassignment surgery. I had a career still in the automobile industry, and I had the surgery, and I was promptly terminated from the corporation. They cleaned my desk out, handed it to me, and said goodbye.
So I took the hormones. Of course, right away, I started filling out muscularly. I started getting acne and started to grow a beard. And then I continued to work out on top of that. So I got pretty buffed and then taking the hormones. And then I was taking an extra little bit more to make sure that I could keep up this physique when I worked out. Because my goal was not to ever be known as a woman. My goal was to only be known as a man. And I couldn't figure out, because I had met some other transsexual people, and they were all about being known. And I'm like, no, I don't want to sit around a group and talk about being a transgender person. I just want to go and live a normal life. This life as a man, normally. That was my whole goal. And so in continuing to work out, I realized later that that was my form of protection. The harder I worked out, the less weak I felt.
I got into high school and I decided, okay, now the challenge is on. I'm not going to have the operation, so I really am going to have to try a little harder to conform and not be such an androgynous tomboy. Fortunately, I have an older sister, so I could take notes from her. And I decided maybe I should grow my hair out a little bit and try on some of my sister's clothes. Nothing too lacy or pink or anything like that, but something that could pass as a girl and I could still feel comfortable in. And then I decided maybe I should try dating boys, because perhaps there's something in me that never got awakened and I just don't knock it till you try it kind of thing. So I asked a boy out my junior year to a turnabout dance and borrowed one of my sister's dresses. So I have this picture of me standing very awkwardly in this dress that wasn't even mine, and nothing really happened that night as far as sparks flying or any attraction with this guy. In fact, the more I tried to date boys and even experiment sexually with them, I discovered it didn't awaken anything in me. All it did was make me more intensely jealous. I wanted to be the boy. I wanted to be the man with the woman, not the woman with the man. And even when I was dressed in those dresses, deep down, I literally felt like a man dressed in drag. I just knew this wasn't my authentic self.
When I was 12 years old, I began to investigate sexuality, and I would dig into pornography, and so I saw myself as just falling in love with these women. And so I thought, well, no, I'm really a male. I really identify more with this male. I think that's a way of me being able to repair myself and to find out what true love is. And I thought that was true love. And I was trying to piece this broken girl.
All science aside, the media continues to line its pockets by printing stories of celebrities who have declared themselves to be transgendered, including Chastity Bono, who now calls herself Chaz; female model Tracy Beatty, who gained celebrity by giving birth to a child while calling herself Thomas; Olympic athlete Bruce Jenner, who now calls himself Caitlyn; Army soldier Bradley Manning, who now calls himself Chelsea. Even the Boy Scouts have yielded to media pressure and begun accepting girls into its ranks who claim to be boys.
The counselor generally will be looking for events, trauma that child has experienced. For instance, some children that are being raised by grandparents where there has not been a strong relationship between that child and the natural parent, trying to uncover, possible molestation. Where did the precedent happen? Were they being bullied by boys and more accepted by the girls, trying to help them adjust and to realize why they struggle like they do, why they feel inadequate in their God-given gender. And one of the things that the counselors will do is, as well, if it's a dad that perhaps has a son that struggles with this, and maybe the son's more artistic, to suggest to the dad, so what? He likes art class. Go take art class with him. He likes piano. Go learn the piano with him. Start to mend on that relationship so that bonding can become stronger between the father-son. If it is a girl that struggles with this, usually when girls struggle with it, it's where they've perceived the mother as a weak model. I don't want to be weak like mom, or I've seen mom become abused and I don't want to be like that. I want to gain control sort of mind thinking. And so the girl needs to readdress the relationship, feeling safe with women and seeing that women can be strong and it's okay and we can be weak, but to accept herself as a woman and to mend on where that brokenness is, on that false perception of what being a woman is that makes her run from her femininity.
Since the biblical view is that there are only two sexes, male and female, and biological sex is the primary indicator of ontological sex, any treatment for gender dysphoria should proceed on the assumption that a person's biological sex, rather than their gender identity, defines whether they are truly male or female. What that means in practice is that any treatments for gender dysphoria should be aiming to bring a person's psychology in line with their physiology rather than the reverse.
So I had 5 or 6 sessions with her, and at the end of those sessions that I had every week, she opened up her book, and I'm sitting there as Laura, and she said, well, you have a dissociative disorder. And I said, really? I said, what does that exactly mean? She said, well, and based on what you've told me, the cross-dressing and then the sexual abuse caused you to dissociate. She said it's not full-blown multiple personalities, but it's a dissociation. You did not want to be who you were because that person who was the little boy was getting sexually abused, was getting cross-dressed, and was getting physically abused. Those things alone, she said, built within you basically another personality. But you're unlike multiple personalities where you don't know the person. You're fully aware of this one. You just weren't happy with being a boy because he got abused too much and had too many bad things happen. So you became someone who didn't have bad things happening. And she said, furthermore, she said, because you've gone through gender reassignment surgery, she said, I think it's going to be almost impossible for you to recover. And I just wept, because, you know, when I went to see the Dr. Walker, he didn't look at me and look for a disorder. I told him about my childhood, but it didn't trigger anything in his mind that maybe there was some disorder. He just looked at it as being transgender or gender dysphoria.
It was a Sunday afternoon. My spiritual dad came up to me and he said, hey, do you got a moment? Can I talk to you about something? And I thought, you know what? I know this feeling of, can I talk to you about something? And I thought, I think I'm going to be confronted. We went back into this prayer room and the pastor looked at me and he said, we're hearing some rumors about you. And I just want to know, who are you? Who are you really? Same question, 11 years earlier. And I'm like, oh, wow. But this time, for whatever reason, I told the truth. And I said, prior to that, I'd said, I'm a man who used to be a woman. This time I said, I'm a woman living as a man. That's the truth. And when I did that, the Holy Spirit went and just blew into me. And I was like, ooh. And, I didn't know much about the prophetic or anything, but I had this quick vision and I saw 2 weeks of my life and everything I needed to do. And I needed to step down from this ministry. And first and foremost, though, I had to go back to being who God created me to be. And I was like, ugh. To me, there was no other option. I had no other choice.
I was working on my 4th step, and anybody that knows anything about AA, the 4th step is the one where you sort of put everything that you felt like was garbage into this can and you start peeling them out. And I went to a clinical psychologist who was a Christian and began to go through these things one Saturday afternoon. And we went through them one by one, carefully, and praying for them and working over them. And it was all the pain and all the hurt, the sexual abuse, every event that had caused me pain that I wanted the Lord to help me with, that I didn't know what to do with. And when we were done, we went out of his office. It was all on yellow-lined piece of paper. I forget how many pages, but there were numerous pages. And we were checking them off as we go. We went outside, and he took a match outside, and we stood in the parking lot that Saturday afternoon. He put a match to the corner of that paper, and it just started to burn. And then we just sit there, and a little breeze took that paper and burned it. It was gone. And I thought, wow, this is really great, symbolism, but is it going to work, What's it going to do? I mean, I needed someone to sign off on my 4th step so I could move to the next one. And that was probably more of an interest to me than anything. And so he put his hand on my shoulder. He said, let's go back in and pray about what we've done here. And I said, that sounds good. So we went in and we sat down across from each other and we began to pray. And it seemed like it was the longest prayer I was ever in. And it may not have been, but during that prayer, all of a sudden, I didn't open my eyes, but I could see the Lord Jesus Christ in white. And his feet were up in the air and he was down in this position with his arms reaching out to me. And I looked in that vision that I had, I looked over and here was a little baby. And the little baby was me as a boy. And he reached down and picked up the boy and cradled him in his arms and then said, you will be safe with me forever. And from that moment on, my life was redeemed and restored, and I began living as Walt. and I have been for over 20 years.
From that point, there was probably maybe a 4-year period where the Lord continued to just woo me, bringing healing. I was just so hungry for him. And I can remember I started reading my Bible every day. I can remember being so happy about my Bible, I would carry it into work, and I'd have it on my desk. And people were like, man, what's wrong with you? You're carrying this Bible thing. And I'm like, yeah, I love it.
I got on the phone with my mom and I told my mom, I said, Mom, I don't know what's going on here. I don't know what's happening to me, but I'm scared, and I don't feel like I'm supposed to be a woman. I messed up. I really did. And the moment that I said that, somehow it dropped into my spirit for me to call my aunt. And my aunt, she's a minister, she's a pastor. I hadn't spoken to my aunt in over 10 years. I didn't know her number. Didn't think to ask my mom for the number. But I looked at my phone and it was there. So I know what he was doing. And at that moment, I called her and I told her what I had seen and what I had been going through. And she said to me, God is calling you, and you have to make a decision. You have to do it today. God is calling you. There is something going on, and he has spared you all this time. He's protected you all this time. Now it's time for you to dim that spotlight, and it's time for you to walk towards the Father and ask him for yourself. I can't do it for you. And I'm sitting in the car, and I'm like, should I do this? Like, if I do this, when am I going to go? I mean, what am I going to do? I have this whole lifestyle. I have breast. I have all these things. I have clients. I have clientele. I have men waiting on me. I need to pay my bills. What am I going to do if I do this? And those thoughts got louder and louder and louder and louder, and I could hear that voice getting smaller and smaller, God's voice just telling me to come to him. Just come to him. Trust him. Just trust me. I'll handle it. I kept hearing that. And at that moment, as I was trying to confess with my mouth, confess my sins and give my life to God, because I had already decided that I was going to do it. Immediately as I was confessing, my phone was ringing. People was calling me that hadn't called me in years. The lights went out. Everything that could distract me from doing this. The powers of evil was working in that moment to stop me from giving my life to Christ. And I wasn't falling for it. 8 hours went by. It was not something that happened in 15 minutes. 8 hours went by. I threw up. I literally regurgitated. And when I regurgitated after I said it, I looked at myself in the mirror. I was shocked. I was shocked. I was seeing myself through different eyes. And at that moment, I was afraid, and God said to me, he said, don't you be afraid of what you see, because I'm going to handle all of this, and I'm going to make it as if it never happened.
Some of the major wounds that I dealt with was, of course, my dad. That was a big deal. And at one point, the Lord came to me and he said, when you pray, I want you to call me Daddy. I had started in this program at the Portland Fellowship, and I was working through my stuff. When I came out of the lifestyle, I got involved with them. One of the teachings on is, what do you call the Lord? And what name can't you call him? And I thought, well, I can call him Father, I can call him Dad, I can call him, I'm like, I don't have an issue with that. And then when the Lord came to me and said, when you pray, I want you to call me Daddy, because that's what I called my dad, was Daddy. And I thought, okay, that's the trigger there, that one. And when he said, I want you to call me Daddy, I said, not doing that, not ever. And so he backed off. And the next day I went to pray and said, oh, Lord. And he's like, I want you to call me Daddy. And I'm like, then we're done. I'm not doing that. Third day, Lord, call me daddy. We're not doing that. This went on for 2 weeks. I'm like, I'm standing my ground because he's not going to make me call him daddy. And I realized later that in calling him daddy was like swearing at him, because that had such a bad taste in my mouth. It meant so many ugly things to me. Why would I want to call the Lord daddy? Why would he want that? So there was a graveyard that I would go and pray at, mostly because it was quiet, nobody bugged me, and I could pace around and pray out loud. And I started to pray, and the Lord said, I want you to call me daddy. And I thought, okay, it's been 2 weeks. He's still asking. Obviously, I haven't changed his mind. So what would be wrong with that? What if that's okay? What if? So I sat there, and honestly, I had to work up courage, because I'm like, okay, wait, if I do this, what is he gonna do to me? How is he gonna respond to me? Because this other person who I called daddy wasn't good. The Lord's supposed to be good, but now I'm calling him a name. So I had this turmoil in there and dealing with fear. It's like, if I say this, I don't know, but what if it's okay? What if it's okay? So I sat there with all the courage I had, and I just said, Daddy. And I broke. And I cried so hard, my sides hurt the next day. I mean, it was this deep within me, gut-wrenching pain, whatever that was, that came out. And I can remember in the midst of that, pounding my fists into that grass as hard as I could, yelling, I hate you, I hate you, I hate you, with everything that I had. In between sobs, screaming this. And then I realized, oh my gosh, I just called the Lord Daddy, and now I'm yelling, I hate you. I'm like, Lord, I don't hate you. I don't hate you. I don't hate you. And the Lord said, I know, but you had to for a moment. It's like, oh, because I understood that he stood in that place. And the only way I know to describe it is that he took that pain, and all I know is something happened that day. You know, there was something within me that was released. There was something within me that was gone, but yet it was still raw in there.
I was with my manager. We were at a function right next to this church, you know, and my manager wanted to smoke. So we came out, and there was a guy standing right almost right next door. And he says, hey, he says, how you doing? You know, and he introduced himself as Pastor Abner. And that's all it took, you know. I mean, far as being accepted by somebody that was faithful in Christ, you know. And he gives me a big hug, and I'm all girl. I have long blonde hair, makeup, short mini skirt, the whole 9 yards, you know. Come join us. We accept everybody. He says, Christ, he accepts everybody. Come as you are. Not go get cleaned up and then come and see me. You know what I mean? So many people they don't realize that, but you have to come as you are.
I remember going to church as I was seeking the Lord and really wanting answers. And I remember walking in and listening to the message, and there wasn't really anything too profound about the message until they invited people to come up to receive prayer. Now, I didn't really think that I needed to surrender my life to the Lord or that I needed to repent. Of course I did, because I wasn't saved. So I went up and I received prayer, and they prayed for me. And I remember this man praying for me, and he came up to me and he said, the Lord loves you. He loves you, and he cares for you. You are his son. And he just kept saying it over and over and over, and I just broke down in tears. I just broke down, and I thought, wow, the Father loves me. He loves me. And he plunged into the depths of darkness to snatch me out like a brand plucked from the fire. This is what he was doing for me. And I experienced his love in such a profound way. I sensed the Holy Spirit so strongly, as though the Lord was standing right in front of me. And it was as though he had entered me. And it was a wind that I was experiencing. It wasn't just a feeling. It was I had been resuscitated and brought back to life.
I kept praying and crying out to God, what is going on? What is going on? And one morning, I will always remember, the Lord woke me up just before I was getting ready to, go back in that false identity. I had met someone, I was going to get married, I was proposed to. The Holy Spirit just awoke in me, and the power of God was so intense, and he just said, it's done. It was like I was living in a fog or a fantasy, and when I awoken, I knew I was Joseph. And I knew that no matter what I added then or took away, I was still Joseph. And it was about him. I didn't have to get my identity or my security or my desire from other people. I didn't have to get the acceptance of the church. I knew that Papa, that's when he became Papa to me. I knew that Papa loved me, and he awoke in me, and I remembered so clear. I woke the guy up, I said, it's done. He goes, what do you mean it's done? I said, pack your stuff, it's done. Okay.
I was there in my pew listening to Matt Stacey speak and crying on the inside. Lord, I'm yours. Lord, I'm broken. Lord, I'm sorry. Lord, forgive me. Lord, it's my fault. It's my fault. I know what your word says. I'm not a mistake. I was made in your image and you're perfect, God.
God knew the desire of my heart deep inside, and that desire was to know him. I mean, I have since I was 8 years old and gave my life to Christ. And since 8 years old, I went to the altar like 3 times again and again, because I knew I wasn't living for God, but I would when they would do altar calls, I would go there, and God knew. It's like I'm seeking him, but I couldn't find him, and there was never anyone to help me, disciple me. My mother was an evangelist. She never would try to teach me to pray. I mean, everything I know now is from the hand of Jesus.
The Lord started putting real men of God in my life, women of God that embrace and that love me, and through that, to this day, I continue to walk forward. And that was 8 years ago.
I had such an urge to want to go to church. I started off going to church as a girl because I had lived that lifestyle for so many years. I had implants. God was just doing things supernaturally. He was putting Christians in my life. I can remember one day I woke up and he wanted me to give my clothes away. I said, okay. I was calling up my sister, and that's one sister that got some expensive clothes. She was very happy. And then all of a sudden I'd go to church and people would say to me, God spoke to me and told me to take you shopping and buy you clothes. He's so faithful like that and so sweet. But the good news is, it's been 11 years now that I've been a reborn-again Christian. The Lord has gotten rid of the implants. I've gotten rid of the silicone in my lips. It was less than a year after I got saved that he took the female hormones from me. Never had to go to a doctor. Never had to go to a psychiatric ward. Instantly delivered like that.
I started reading my Bible again. And as I read my Bible, it became alive to me. In 2 Samuel chapter 14, verse 14, it says, all of us must die eventually. Our lives are like water poured out on the ground, which cannot be gathered up again. But God doesn't just sweep life away. Instead, he devises ways to bring us back to him when we've gone astray. That's love. That is love.
It was incredibly hard. I'm going to be honest. It was very hard to go through the transition because I was going through a metamorphosis now to become a man, because the Lord just supernaturally made me hate the implants. I mean, they were a center showpiece for years. And he just supernaturally made me hate them. I loathed them.
When I'm watching TV and hearing a certain pastor talk about homosexuality, it I almost like having a nervous breakdown, because I knew that I couldn't change. This is who I am. Felt God made me this way. That's what I thought, this is all I know, and I feel like a woman. I'm going to become a woman. But you're going to say I'm going to hell? So I had to get in a Bible. We had Bible in our house. Get on the internet. I was trying to find a loophole saying, no, it's okay. And so my partner knew this Christian couple. And so the next morning, which is Saturday, the day before Easter, I went to their home and they prayed with us and said, yeah, if you continue to living this way, you are in destruction. You're going to go to hell. And God doesn't want that. So the next day I went back to Lafayette, where my brother goes to church and his family. I just screamed out for God that day on Easter of 2011. And then on Mother's Day I was baptized by that same couple that prayed with me. And then they introduced me to a wonderful church that I still go to.
How do I, as a Christian, respond to this disturbed person? Certainly not to be condemning, not to make them feel bad about themselves, but also I have a commitment to not collude with your illusion. I'm not going to call you Mary, okay? Your name is Tony. It was Tony a month ago, and you're still Tony, okay? Now, I may spare you the stress of me insisting that I call you Tony. I'll just say, hi, how are you? Okay, but I have to make a decision. And each individual Christian has to make a decision. If I am grounded in the natural law, which is compatible with Christianity and Judaism for that matter, then how do I want to respond to this person with compassion, but not to collude with their illusion? And that's a decision, that's a boundary that has to be found with each individual.
From a Christian perspective, we should recognize that gender dysphoria is a genuine condition, which is best understood as a kind of psychological disorder or dysfunction, and perhaps also as a deeper spiritual dysfunction. But I think we need to recognize it as a genuine condition, and one that doesn't have a simple identifiable cause or the same cause in every case. And it's not something that is chosen. People do not choose to have these experiences of gender dysphoria. And that's going to be important to recognize if we are going to respond to it in an appropriate, responsible, biblical way.
I came back to the Lord through a Mormon family. They brought me to Christian Life Assembly. The pastor had not dealt with this before, but he was the perfect example of a great way to react to something like this. I had announced it in front of the whole congregation with 3,000 people that my name was going to be Stephen, and I'm going to have this operation done. And, you know, my pastor just took me to the side and he said, we don't agree with what you're doing, but we love you, and we want you to know that you're welcome here. We sat down, and he just let me bare my heart as to why I'm feeling that way, and as to what is making me feel that I'm supposed to be a male. And I was very adamant, I'm supposed to be a male. He just began to say, Susan, there's reasons why you're feeling the way that you do, but you know, you're not a failure. And that just broke my heart. And he just says, there's a lot of hurt underneath. And we know that you know that you want to live the life that is real. And you want to find out who you are, and you really don't know who you are. And that's the first time I ever think I really liked myself.
There's something in there that has rooted a lie in you that is saying that this is not right. That you were born in the wrong body, you're wired totally wrong, there's something wrong with your hormones, there's something wrong with you. And I would say that's a lie, because there's nothing wrong with you. Something came in there, either an event, maybe it was a flippant remark, but it stuck with you for whatever reason. You came into agreement with that lie. And you said, yes, I believe that that's true. And from there, that little tiny seed began to take root and began to grow this tree and these branches. And then it began to produce fruit. And from that, this little tiny seed, it's usually roots of rejection, abandonment, abuse, whether that's emotional, physical, sexual. There's something in there, something traumatic that happened. I've heard people say, but my parents loved me. We were raised in a great Christian home. Okay, but from 0 to 5, there's that, the formative years, and there was something in there that happened that was either traumatic, maybe there is something that you don't remember, but there's something in there that told you that lie, that came into an agreement with something within you, whether it be rejection. Most of the time, it's the root of rejection. I dealt with deep self-hatred. For some reason, I hated myself. Was that just because I was a woman? I think it was also because I didn't think I was good. I wasn't good enough. I wasn't pretty enough. I didn't have any value. So there's something in there where that lie attaches to, and you believe it, and you come into agreement with it, and then from there you begin to bear this fruit. You begin to manifest, I'm gonna live as a guy. I'm supposed to be this way. A lot of the women that I've talked with and transgender people that I've talked with that have come out of that or are still even in it, there's 99% of them, there's some kind of abuse there. I would say 80% of the time it's sexual abuse. But there's always some kind of emotional abuse there, some kind of trauma that's happened.
I heard somebody talk about how to get free from habitual repetitive sin. If you're in an addictive cycle, the only way to get free is to take what's in the dark and to expose it in God's light. And I don't remember anything else they said at that conference except James 5:16, confess your sins one to another and pray for each other so that you may be healed. And it's like the Holy Spirit pierced my spirit with that scripture, and I just knew I will never be free from these desires unless I get what's in the dark in the light, and that I need to tell my campus pastor what's going on. And we had an hour-long breakfast of painstaking small talk where I could not bring myself to say it. And at the end, he said, was there something in particular you wanted to meet about? I said, yes, but I'm having a very difficult time telling you. And finally, I garnered up the strength, and inwardly I braced because I was fearful of his reaction. But I told him all my deepest, darkest secrets. And he looked at me straight in the eyes, and he said, Linda, I want to thank you for trusting me with that information. I know that took a lot of courage for you to share that with me. And I want you to know that doesn't change our opinion of you. We love you, and we're going to get you the help that you need. And I walked away from that conversation. I was stunned. I said, Holy Spirit, what was that? That was not the reaction I was expecting. You know what the Lord said? I just sensed his still small voice speak to my heart and say, Linda, that's how I feel about you. I love you, and I want to get you the help that you need. And so that was the first step in what was to be an 11-year journey of transformation. I didn't know it would be 11 years, or I would have never signed up. But I'm also grateful for my campus pastor who demonstrated compassion without compromise. He was extremely understanding, but he didn't compromise on the truth of God's word. I'm so grateful he did not say, well, that's okay. You just embrace, if you really feel like you're a man on the inside, there's sex reassignment surgery today, and we'll help you get the hormones and get the surgery started, and we'll be a support network for you. You know, it would have been most unloving for him to reinforce my brokenness and rob me of the redemptive power of the cross.
That truth started to really settle in. That's what really started really breaking the chains. Because I was at the core of what was really causing my problem here. I was saying to God, I know the way you made me, but I'm not going to accept that. I'm going to remake myself in the image I have in my mind. I was saying I was God. I was being equal with God here. And then there came a point where God asked me a question. He said, Kerry, what do you really want? And I had to actually think about that. I thought about it for 2 or 3 days. And finally I went to God and I said, well, what I want is I want to know what it's like to overcome this cycle of sin in my life. I want to know what it is to be an overcomer. I want to know all about your love. But most of all, I want to know you. I really, really, really want to know you. So then he reminded me of, if any man would be my disciple, he must lay down his selfish ambition. He must pick up his cross, and he must follow me. Because anybody that seeks to keep their life for themselves will lose their life. But any man who would willingly lay down his life for my sake will find true life. And that is the key scripture that started really, really, really breaking me finally free. Jesus gave me something I wanted more, the cross-dressing. I wanted him. Above anything and everything else, I wanted him.
What God wants from us is our love for him, to have a relationship with him. He wanted that so much that he sent his son to die for us on the cross, to take our sins on the cross. And he wants us to have a relationship with other people, healthy relationships. Becoming a transgender person, taking that step, was probably one of the most selfish things I ever did in my life. And what we're called upon is to be selfless, to give of ourselves to others, just as our Lord did, our Lord Jesus Christ did. You can catch happiness. It's like a flittering butterfly, and you can catch it, but it's going to die and go away. But true joy is found through knowing and having a relationship with God through his Son, Jesus Christ. That is true joy. And that is available just by having a change of heart, repenting, asking God for forgiveness, and accepting his Son into your life. And that will make you a whole person.
One of the lies that has been sold to our culture is that sexual fulfillment is the greatest kind of fulfillment, and that sexual love is the highest kind of love. There's no doubt that sexual fulfillment is very important, and sexual love comes from God. It's by God's design, and it's something that ideally we should all experience. However, to focus so much on our sexual identity and the idea of sexual fulfillment, I think, is to miss more important, deeper kinds of love and fulfillment that God has in store for us. The ultimate kind of love that we should pursue is a love for God and love by God. And that isn't a sexual love, it goes far, far beyond that. Then there is the kind of love that is found in human community. And for those who are sexually broken and who struggle with what they perceive as a lack of sexual fulfillment, God may or may not resolve that in this life. But what he does promise, I believe, is that if such a person joins together with fellow believers, they will experience a deeper and ultimately more satisfying kind of love, the love that is shared between people who have a common salvation, people who love one another because they recognize that they have first been loved by God and by Christ. Now that isn't a substitute for sexual love, but it is a greater kind of love that I think will put that desire for sexual love in its proper perspective. Likewise, there are different kinds of intimacy. We speak about sexual intimacy, and it's right that we do. It's a very important thing. It's something that God has designed for a man and a woman who are joined together in marriage. But again, there are other kinds of intimacy. There's the intimacy between a parent and a child. There's the intimacy that there is between biological siblings. There's the intimacy that there is between close friends. There's the intimacy that one finds among fellow believers in the context of the local church. But the greatest kind of intimacy, the intimacy that if you know it, if you know that kind of intimacy, it puts all other relationships into the shadows, is the intimacy that you can have with God by knowing not just that there is a God, but that you are brought into an eternal relationship with God, and that you can experience the reality of God day by day through faith in Jesus Christ.
In your thinking of being born in the wrong body, if you're really struggling, it's pressing into the Lord and asking him for the truth. What is the truth? How do you see me? Lord, who can I talk to? Who is it that I can talk to? And he will be faithful to that. He will bring people that can, people who have gone before me. I've read testimonies and I've went, wow, if you can do that for them, you can do this for me. And the other part is being willing to look at that. Because honestly, it's a whole lot of pain. There's stuff that I don't know if I'd walk through it again, but yet I would walk through it again because of the freedom that I now have. Yeah, there's a lot of crappy stuff you're going to have to look at. There's a lot of crappy stuff that's going to bring up even more stuff that you're going to have to look at. But the only way out is to go back through it and have the truth revealed and what really happened in those situations. Because once we embrace that lie, we now have this filtering system, and everything is filtered through that lie. So even the truth can be all distorted when it comes through, and you're like, that's not the truth, because this here is what I have right now, that's the truth, so that can't be the truth. So even when it comes in, we reject it because of the seed that we have in our heart already of the lie, and because of the filtering system that we have, that we now view everything through this lens, and it needs to be cleaned out. And doing that is having people come with you, giving you the truth. And I think it's important to have, they say it takes a village. It takes a village. I had a village of people. However, they each brought an important component to me, when I needed it, of this truth, because they're not in my place. They don't know what I'm going through. Therefore, they can speak the truth because I can't see that. There's places that we can't see that the people on the outside can. And if you're willing to be open with them and willing to, even if you don't agree with them, just willing to think about it and ask that question, what if that's true? And there are going to be well-meaning people out there that really want to help you in your healing process. They really think they're doing you a really great thing. However, it's up to you to ask the Lord, who are these safe people? Who are the people that are safe? Because there will be those that, for me, they brought me makeup and lotions and things that would help me be feminine. It's not about being feminine, it's about being holy. It's about finding freedom in Christ and looking to him to define that. It took probably about 6 years before I could actually dress feminine, because in my heart, I didn't know that that was okay to embrace that. So the outside reflects the inner healing that has gone on, because you can't embrace what you're rejecting. You know, so people tried to put me in dresses, and I'm like, no, that's not happening, because I'm not there yet. And it's okay to take it at your pace. You know, the Lord's going to walk you through this. If you're obedient to those convictions that he brings, though you look at it and you go, this is a big mountain. Lord, I don't think I can climb it. He's not asking you to climb it in a day. He's just asking you to take one step. And as you take that one step, he's faithful to take that step with you. And it's knowing that he's not calling you out to a place. He's not going to call you out to take you back to Egypt. He's just not like that. I haven't found him to be like that ever. I've only walked forward with him. Is there still things that he's revealing about my femininity? Yeah, he is. I'm not done by any means, but I am free. There's things that no longer hold me bound that I didn't think I would ever be free from, but I am.
People who suffer from gender dysphoria, and it is a real condition, and we have to recognize that people really do suffer from this experience of this incongruity between the way that they feel about gender and their actual biological sex. People who are in that condition will say, well, why did God make me this way? Or if this is wrong, then how is God going to address this? How can it be fixed? What hope do I have in this world? And we need to recognize several things. We need to recognize first that we are all broken individuals at some level. We all experience brokenness at multiple levels, and that will include the sexual level as well. And that brokenness is not part of the original creation order. It's a consequence of the fall. It's a consequence of human sin. And so it's not accurate to say, well, God made me this way, therefore it needs to be affirmed, or therefore it's right for me to live this out in practice. We need to recognize that we are a combination of what is good, what God originally created, but also what has become corrupted by sin. But there is hope, and that hope for the transgender person is the same as it is for any other human being. That hope is that sin and its consequences have been decisively overcome by Jesus Christ. We may not experience the fullness of that salvation in this life. We continue to live as broken people, and there can be a measure of healing, there can be a measure of resolution, there can be a measure of comfort in this life, and many, many people can testify to that, whatever form of sexual brokenness they have suffered from in the past. There can be a measure of healing. They have experienced the power of Christ in this life. But our hope does not lie in being fixed in this life. None of us will be perfectly mended from sin and its consequences in this life. And so we look ultimately to the future, to the restoration of all things, to the resurrection of the body, to our glorification as creatures, fallen creatures, who are restored in the image of God, specifically in the image of Christ, by our union with Him through faith.
The scriptures tell us, "For the eyes of the Lord range throughout the earth to strengthen those whose hearts are fully committed to Him. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. Then you will call upon me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. I will be found by you, declares the Lord. If anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will save it. What good is it for a man to gain the whole world and yet lose his very soul? Everyone has at least one major cross in this fallen world, whether it be the child born without limbs, the one who develops intense homosexual desires, or the person who struggles with gender dysphoria. But the answer is the same. Say with the psalmist, I lift up my eyes to the hills. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. He will watch over your coming and going, both now and forevermore.